Let me bring on now Belinda Lopez, and I saw Belinda for the first time at Now Hear This, a storytelling slam co-sponsored by Radio National and run by a friend of mine, Melanie Tate, at the Art House Hotel, and she romped it in terms of the storytelling slam. Not putting any pressure on Belinda, of course. Just expect another winning storytelling. But please welcome to the stage, Belinda Lopez.
My family is always telling me, and has always told me since I was a kid, you're too open with strangers. And I guess this is understandable. It's understandable that they'd say this to me because I was the kind of kid that would bring senile old ladies home for afternoon tea. I'd be the kind of kid that would approach a man in a raincoat at the supermarket and I'd ask him for a lolly. And I've always seen most people in this world as a potential friend. And my family just couldn't understand this. And maybe it's a WOG thing because they're Spanish. But they'd always say, you know, ten cuidado con la gente extraña. Be careful with strangers. And I really struggled to understand this attitude, why they were so, you know, worried about strangers. And I discovered the reason why when I went back to Spain when I was 24. We didn't really have the cash to go to Spain, at least to send me to Spain when I was a kid. So I was 24 years old and I was so excited because I was going to meet my great aunt. This was my grandmother's sister and I was, you know, so looking forward to meeting her. And I was imagining this frail old thing. She was apparently 83. And when I met her, I just met this powerhouse of an 83-year-old, you know. She was so intense, she was completely overprotective, and she'd insist on holding my hand, even though I was 24, whenever we went out walking in the street. And she just gripped me almost painfully. And she lived in a nice neighbourhood. She kind of powered round it like she had a motor attached to her ass. And as we'd walk through this neighbourhood, a nice neighbourhood, and so nice that a lot of migrant families had decided to move in. And, you know, whenever we'd pass a young man whose skin was any darker than her own Spanish whiteness, she'd start pumping my hand fervently just to warn me, you know, just to be aware. And if she was feeling particularly brave that day, she'd say, negro, you know, black man. And she'd give me the knowing eye like, if he attacks us, fire up the motor. And then it was all clear to me it was just about racism, so I think it is a WOG thing. But like I said, I've always been pretty open and wanting to meet people until about the age of 18. And it was the first time I was going overseas, and I went to Vietnam. And, you know, I was a very earnest, socially conscious 18-year-old, very keen to do the right thing in the world, for global justice. And I'd been told that if you give money to beggars and street kids and the homeless, you're simply perpetuating the cycle of dependency and robbing them of their economic motivation, making them dependent on aid for the rest of their lives. And I did not want to do this because I was a socially conscious, earnest 18-year-old. So I land in Hanoi and of course, ding, first, you know, street kid that sees me, I am a target. They can see my earnestness. I've got earnest written on my forehead. And she just comes up to me with these beautiful, big brown eyes and says, please, I don't have any food for my family. Can I have some money to buy some food? And I was like, don't do it. Control yourself. And I said, look, I'm sorry, I can't. And she must have sensed how desperate and painful it was to say no to her, because she kept following me around, and she followed me around for half an hour saying, please, my family doesn't have any food, please, can I have some money? And I was just like, oh! And after half an hour I just broke, because this kid had been following me around the city, and I said, look, I won't give you any money, but I will buy you a loaf of bread for your family to share. You can break it up, you know. And I thought, okay, you've stuck to your economic rationalist guns, but you are also being generous with this loaf of bread. And this little girl just looks at me with her big brown eyes and she says, "Fuck you, white girl. I don't like bread. I want money." And I was traumatised. I mean, this event traumatised me to the extent that I stopped engaging with homeless people. Like, I wouldn't even look at them in the eye. I couldn't make eye contact with them. When I went back to Sydney, it was too hard to be an economic rationalist and try and, make sure that they didn't engage in this cycle of dependency and not engage with them as human beings. So I chose the latter. I just didn't engage with them. I pretended they weren't there. I would spend hours wrestling with myself over the fact that I hadn't given a homeless man $2 long after he'd said, "No worries, love, have a nice day anyway." So I just decided, I'm not going to look at them. I'll pretend they're not there. Until a homeless woman fell right into my arms. I was studying economics, actually, in London, and I was coming back from a late night class. I was walking back to the bus stop with a friend, and suddenly this woman just kind of launches herself at me, and the first thing I noticed was that she just stunk. I think she stunk of urine and God knows what else. She looked like a drug addict. Her face was all sunk in and she was just crazy. She had wild hair, she had teeth missing. And I'm about to push this woman off because beyond, economic dependency, this woman was after me. And I was like, So she just launches herself at me and I'm about to push her off and then she says, "Help me." And I just kind of stop for a moment. She says, "Help me. Peter's after me. He's after me and he raped me. He had a screwdriver and he raped me." And I just said, "What? Who's Peter? Who hurt you? What happened?" But it was too late. She was already kind of moving her head all over the place and she was looking at me like there was an imaginary person on my left, and then she just took off. She just took off the street. She started walking up the street. And then, as I said, it was a late night class and my bus was coming and I was pretty sure it was maybe the last bus for the night. I wasn't sure. And my friend's with me and she's kind of giving me this look like, "She's gone. Let's just go." And this woman's pacing up the street and the bus is coming. And I'm looking at the woman and I'm looking at the bus. And then I take off after the woman. I just took off after her and I ran up to her and I caught up to her, and when I found her, she was crying. And she said, "Please, I don't know how to get home. Can you take me home?" And, we sought the help of strangers. We found where the address was and what bus we had to catch. And over the next hour, as we're making our way home, she's telling me a bit about her life. She'd had a tough life, a hard life. And in the middle of these lovely little stories, she just said, "He raped me. I'm 57 years old and he raped me." And I said, "Look, let's just go to the police. Let's go to the hospital. They can make sure that whoever this guy Peter is, that he'll be punished." And she said, "I took money. I took £40. I didn't know he had a screwdriver, but the police will blame me. They won't listen." And I said, "It doesn't matter. Let's just go. Let's go to the hospital. Let's go now. You don't deserve this." And she just said, nah. And she wouldn't talk about it anymore. And I worked out it was her stop, and I said, let's just get off then. Let's get off here. And we're walking along the street, and she passes a hairdresser. And, it was a Thursday night. It was open late, and there were all these trendy guys. And then she waves to them, and she said, "Hello." And they knew her because they waved back, and they're like, "Hi." And then she kind of stops and says to herself, "I'm going to tell him." She walks into the hairdresser and says, "I was raped." And then she walked out. And they didn't say anything. And I went in after her and I said, I explained what I knew and said, "Look, obviously you know her. Maybe you can give the police a call and explain some of the background, explain where she lives and stuff. I don't even know." And one of the young trendy guys, I didn't say anything for a moment, and then one of them said, "The thing is that a lot of people don't like to get involved in this kind of thing, so it's probably better if you call them." And an hour earlier, could I have done the same thing? I don't know. But I'd spent an hour with this woman and I knew her background. I knew she was a good person, even though she looked scary. And I just was thinking, you cowards. Anyway, Greta disappears behind a door, and I follow her into her home. And I just feel this huge sense of relief because everything is sterile. You know, there's sterile bench tops and women in nursing uniforms and manila folders lined up. And I said, "What is this place?" And the nurse said, "This is St. Mungo's, it's a homeless shelter." And they said, "Hello, Greta." And Greta, the woman, just disappears behind a door, and before she does, she says, "You tell him." And I told the nurses what I knew, what had happened, and apparently Peter had kind of been after her before, but never quite like this. And I made a police statement, and apparently Peter was prosecuted. And this isn't a story about being a hero, because the truth is I don't actually know what happened to Greta after that. I couldn't get in touch with her. She disappeared. Like, I guess it's easy to do when you're a homeless person. But on the way home on the bus, after I'd given my statement, I just felt this huge sense of relief. And it wasn't even for Greta, because like I said, I don't know what happened to her. It was for me. It was because I hadn't got on the bus. I'd gone after her, and I could look at myself in the mirror. And I think, you know, the inspiration for that kind of thing actually does come from my family. It comes from my mum. Hi, Mum. She's in the audience. You know, when we were a kid, she used to stop and pick up elderly neighbours of ours that lived in the neighbourhood that were carrying their shopping home. You know, maybe 3 kilometres. They weren't allowed to drive anymore. And she'd stop and she'd say, "You know, would you like a lift, Mrs. Rose? Or can I help you with your shopping, Mr. Johnson?" And, you know, they'd gratefully get in. And after they got out slowly and they shut that big heavy door behind them and kind of wandered up to their front door, Mum would turn around, she'd twist her torso to the back seat, and she'd say to us kids, "You know, I do that because I hope that one day when I'm old, someone will do that for me." And I guess that's it, isn't it? Because if everyone's your friend, one day someone will be yours too, when you really need it. Thanks.
Belinda Lopez, another round of applause. And the wonderful Mrs. Lopez, who's